Welcome to the EX Podcast, where I talk with business leaders, authors, and disruptors on how the workplace is changing. This podcast brings a different lens to the conversation around HR transformation, company culture, and employee engagement. It provides a brand and customer experience perspective rather than a traditional HR perspective. Why? Because companies have to think of themselves as employment brands if they want to attract and retain talent. It is time we put people first to rehumanize the workplace, simply because leaders who don't care about the employees will eventually be surrounded by people who don't care about their business. Today with Chester, we talk about what differentiates high-performing teams versus less-performing teams. What are the critical steps to build a winning culture that drives results? How to maintain momentum through challenges, new dynamics as people come in or leave? Why is candor and feedback important? And how can leaders create an employee-focused organization? Support for this podcast is brought to you by Life Guides. Responding to the inevitable and unexpected life challenges of your employees is one of the most profound opportunities to express your level of care, empathy, and compassion for the well-being of your people. The Life Guides Network partners with organizations who recognize this profound opportunity and provides them with a platform to match the employees who are going through a specific life challenge with trained guides who have successfully navigated the same life challenge. Life Guides is a peer-to-peer network that exists to unlock and share the largest untapped and valuable resource on the planet, human wisdom and experience. Find out more at www.lifeguides.com. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Chester. And because it takes a good amount of time to produce this podcast, please make sure to review the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, or YouTube, as it would help promote the content. If you want me to speak at the next event, get some advice on your EX initiatives, or send me feedback and suggestions to future topics or guests, you can reach me at svincent@exsummit.com or on Twitter at ex_summit. All right, let's get to it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the EX Podcast. Super excited for today's guest, Chester Elton. Chester is calling from Summit in New Jersey. He's an author, executive coach, keynote speaker, partner, and founder of The Culture Works. Chester, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation.
Just to start with an easy question, or maybe not, tell us who Chester is and what you do.
Yeah, you're right. That's not an easy question. How do you sum up your life in 30 seconds, right? I grew up in Canada in a ridiculously happy household. Went to school in the States, fell in love with a beautiful American woman, Heidi Olson. We've been married for 36 years now. 4 exceptional children, 3 who are married, and we have 2 lovely grandchildren. So that's the personal side. The professional side is I really grew up in sales. I loved to match people with great products. I started in media. My father was in media in Canada. He was a broadcaster and then ended up managing some radio stations. Came to the States, sold TV time, and then spent 19 years with a wonderful company called O.C. Tanner, where we sold recognition programs.
Yeah.
And what got me into writing and so on is I remember talking to our CEO at the time, and I said, I love the world of employee recognition. We should become the thought leaders in our space, because if we are the thought leaders, you'll make my job a lot easier. People will call us for advice instead of me having to cold call them to sell them our services. And Thought Leaders published. I said, you know what? His name is Kent Murdoch. I said, Kent, the definitive book in employee recognition has not been written. We should write it. And he goes, great, write the book. And it was one of those moments where I said, Kent, I think you misunderstood me. I get crushing sales quotas every year. I think you should write the book, I should benefit, is what I meant. And then he said something that really changed everything. He said, you know what, Chester, you're a smart guy. Figure it out. I like the idea. So for about a year, I toyed with ideas about titles and chapters and what it would mean. And he called me back. I love this about a good leader. He remembered. He called me back and he said, I've hired a writer. His name is Adrian Gostick. You've got a lot of great ideas. He knows how to write. Get together and write the book. And that's exactly what we did. Our first little effort was a small publisher out of Layton, Utah, and it was called Managing with Carrots. And it launched a whole series of carrot books, and we went from recognition to culture, to leadership, to teams, and we've just finished our 11th book. We've had 5 New York Times bestsellers. We've sold 1.6 million copies of our books. They're in 30 languages, and we couldn't be happier to be able to have such a positive impact on the workplace in creating what we call all-in cultures. So, Stefan, how did I do?
Awesome. More than 30 seconds, but it was a great background.
That is true.
Well, tell us what, in your mind, differentiates high-performance team versus lower-performance teams.
Great question, and obviously one that we've been asked many times. There are so many dimensions to teams. To me, all those dimensions really do focus around really rock-solid communication. By that I mean it's transparent, it's easy, you take the agendas out of the communication. And as we started to write our book on teams, The Best Team Wins, we delved into a database of over 850,000 engagement surveys and well over 50,000 of our own assessments called the Motivators Assessment. And number one in the modern day team was this idea of being able to manage generations. Again, how do you communicate effectively, clearly, quickly, regardless of the generational differences? That was a big key in the differences between good teams and extraordinary teams. Does that make sense to you?
Yes. What makes good communication? Is it how do you find the right balance between transactional, directing type of communications and more inspirational or motivational communications?
Well, again, I think it's managing to the one. And we actually spent a fair amount of time in our book talking about exactly that. Good leaders know something about their teams. The extraordinary leaders know a lot. By that, I mean, old school was we treat everybody the same, that's fair. The new school is we treat everyone differently and fairly, right? Mm-hmm. So this idea of taking the time to sit down and get to know every member of your team, what their aspirations are, what their best contributions are to the team, and what is the most effective way to communicate with them. Now, you're going to need a lot of different ways to communicate. The dynamic of the modern day team is really unique right now in that there are teams that can have up to 5 different generations.
Yes.
Well, you're going to have people on your team that are going to respond best to face-to-face. Others are simply going to want to be transactional, as you mentioned, with emails or texts. Others are going to want to Zoom, and on, right? And being able to understand the best way to communicate for each member of the team. Now, that does sound like a lot of work, and at times it is. The point that I'm making is that when you take the time up front to make sure that you're doing it in a way that's personalized and that's effective, it saves you a lot of time on the back end. In other words, it saves you a lot of time having to re-explain what's going on, or I missed the memo kind of attitude, right?
Yeah.
So this idea of managing to the one was really key. And for those of you that are listening, I know you're thinking, man, that sounds like a lot of work. It is a bit of work up front. The time that it saves you on the back end, though, is tremendous. And that's really the difference, I think, between the good and the extraordinary teams. What do you think?
I would say maybe also the trust and the empowerment, meaning that you can spend as much time as needed up front to set expectations, to communicate clearly to different individuals in different ways. And if you set the vision clearly, but you trust and you empower your team, as you said, you don't have to spend much time on communications down the road because you trust your team to deliver.
Right. And I think there's a lot of messaging that goes on when you're doing that. For example, if I'm the employee and my supervisor is sitting down with me and she's being very careful and very considerate on how I want to be communicated with, that's a great message from the leader to the employee, to the team member, right? That this is going to be great. My leader cares enough about me to make sure that when messages go out, it's quick, it's clear, it's understood. And to your point, once I've got that information, I'm empowered to go ahead and do what needs to be done to support my client, my team members, internal clients, whatever it might be. I think that's very insightful.
What are the critical steps to build a winning culture that drives results? Because having a great culture is great, but if you can't have great results and impact business performance, just like it's nice to be there, to work there, but at the same time, you don't really drive any impact on the business.
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, we've got a great culture, but we never sell anything. Well, that's not a great culture, right? So we define what we call an all-in culture, and we publish this data in our book, All In, How the Best Managers Create This Culture of Belief That Drives Big Results. And our definition of a high-performance culture or an all-in culture is a place where I believe what I do matters. I make a difference, and that difference is noticed and rewarded. So when you think about that, I understand the vision and the mission, right? I can connect the dots between what I do every day and realizing that mission, vision, and value. And then when I do perform, it's noticed and celebrated. You know, in our book, The Best Team Wins, we took a whole chapter that said, and while you're doing all that, don't forget the customer.
Yes.
You know, let's treat each other with respect, you know, and all those wonderful things and so on. Let's not forget that the reason we're doing all this is so that we can create amazing products and services to our customers, to engage them, increase loyalty, grow the business, you know, sell more products, make a difference that way as well. So I agree with you. Say, I don't know what happened. You know, we had a foosball table, we had a ping pong table, we had free lunches. I don't get it, you know. Well, if that's what you're focusing on,
right,
to the detriment of everything else, obviously it becomes a little silly.
You talked about rewards. How do you define rewards?
Again, that's a very personal experience. Mm-hmm. You know, we just recently took a deep dive on leading with gratitude. And I think that there is a difference between recognition and gratitude. Let's see what you think of this differential, Stefan. Yeah. I think recognition can be somewhat transactional, you know, and it can be sometimes programmatic. You do something and I give you a catalog and you pick something from a catalog or you get a pen. I'm not saying those programs aren't important. I do think that they lose their impact if you don't have a culture of gratitude that permeates every day in the workplace. Now, again, managing to the one, if I've done something really great, I want to make sure that I'm recognized in a way that's meaningful to me. I'll tell you a quick story, and I love this one, where we met this guy, and he was just the greatest salesperson ever at this furniture company, right? So he'd won Salesman of the Year 4 years in a row, and he was about to win it for the 5th time. Well, the award for the Salesman of the Year was an all-expense paid trip for he and his spouse to Hawaii. He's like, wow, that's pretty great. And spending money in the whole bit. The problem is he'd never taken the trip. And here he is up for the 5th time. And finally they went to him and they said, we'll call him Frank, right? Because, you know, that was his name. And said, Frank, you never take the trip. What's up? He says, I am deathly afraid of flying. See, no one had asked him. Yeah. You know, here's this great trip, and he's terrified to get on the plane. So they sat down with him. The story has a happy ending. And they said, well, what is really important to you? He said, you know, I live in Ohio. My kids are now living all over the country. We've got 5 kids. You know, we've got 15 grandkids. I never see them as much as I'd like to. You know what I would love? I would love to have a family reunion and be able to fly everybody in and have a big barbecue and take all the photos and the whole bit. And they said, well, you know what? We've got so much money in the kitty from the last 4 years and now the 5th year. That is not a problem. Well, what kind of impact do you think that had on that salesperson? Do you think he's all in the next year?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So personalizing the recognition, managing to the one. For some people, it's going to be more work, right? They want to be on a product development team. They want to go to a conference where they can learn more about systems and IT and whatever. For others, it's going to be time off with their families. For others, it's going to be and on and on and on, right? Really exceptional leaders that are leading great teams understand that when that time comes to really honor the efforts and the sacrifices of that team member, they know how to do it in a way that's really personal and really rewarding and memorable. And again, what's the message? I took the time. We figured it out. You matter. You're not the same as everyone else.
Yeah.
And that's a great culture.
That's always the challenge with recognition programs is it's a package and it's really hard to personalize, especially when it's a very large company, because, the mindset is set in a way that you have to be fair with everyone. So basically just give everyone the same thing. And that's treating everyone fairly, which is not the case really. But it's in many HR departments or recognition department or teams, that's the mindset. Now let's give everything the same thing because it's easier for once. And secondly, just because it's more fair for everyone.
Well, and I'm not saying that those programs are completely without value. There is a nice part of that that's a reminder to recognize someone for their loyalty that's maybe been with you for 20 years and so on. What I'm saying is that if that's all you're doing, you're making a huge mistake. And there are ways to personalize those experiences with the way the award is presented and so on. You're seeing companies are using a lot more choice and so on. I do think that there is value there. If the culture isn't right, all that stuff doesn't matter. If you get the culture right, all those things can build on each other, and good team leaders, good supervisors, good managers find ways to personalize it in a way that's very impactful.
Now, as people come and go through teams, whether they move from one team to another, or they leave the company, or they join a new organization, it causes a lot of challenges. And how do you maintain momentum through those types of challenges and new dynamics as people come and leave?
Well, wonderful question. We talk about speed to productivity when you're onboarding people. It used to be old school. You had a year to get people up to speed, and then the second year they were break even, and the third year they were profitable. Well, with today's mobile workforce, you may not have them for 3 years. Mm-hmm. The average millennial is spending about 2.5 years per job, and you're going to have 14 or 15 jobs during your career. So this idea of onboarding, I think, is a really interesting one that you bring up. We find that the wonderful cultures, they will assign a mentor, they'll assign a friend, a buddy, whatever it is. They'll do a lot of homework before day one. They'll make sure that if you have business cards, which many people don't have any of those anymore either, but the business cards are ready. The space is there. The forms have all been filled out. So they're not spending a lot of time on the paperwork and so on, right? They've got a laptop. They know what the passwords are. They know where to park and on and on and on. You're doing all that work up front to make sure that first day's experience is really positive. We talk about those first impressions, and I think they're critically important.
Yes.
You can imagine if your first day at work, they weren't expecting you and you couldn't find where you were supposed to park, or you didn't have the right security clearance, or, the message is, wow, I thought they wanted me. Clearly they don't, right? So doing that prep for day one, and then ongoing, these check-ins from the supervisor, having someone that you can ask questions of so you don't feel silly. Questions like, where is the cafeteria? Where do I want to park so that I, don't get towed? Those kinds of things, while silly, can cause a lot of angst on their first few days or weeks at work. The way you welcome people to the company, I think says a lot about who you are. Yes. And your culture, as does the way you say goodbye. Whether it's through redundancy or downsizing or merging, whether it's you've actually fired someone or they're leaving for a better opportunity. In so many companies, when you leave, it's sort of a betrayal of the one and only true faith, and not only are you rushed out the door with a security guard making sure that you haven't taken anything with you, you're also then blamed for everything that goes wrong for the next 6 months, right? Because you're not there to defend yourselves. Well, it must have been Chester's fault. That was something he was working on before he left. So I think, again, communication and messaging is so important. How do you welcome people to your company says a lot about who you are. I think the way you say goodbye to people says even more, right? Because at some point, everyone leaves the company, and they're all watching to see how is it done? Is it done with dignity? Is it done with care? Is it done with respect? Because if it isn't, then when it comes your time to go, you're going to dash out the door. You don't want to have that horrible experience. And your knowledge workers and experience and customer relationships are going to flee with them.
Yes.
As opposed to when you do it in a dignified way, they're happy to share. They become ambassadors for other people that want to join your organization and so on. It really is, I think, a critical measure of the quality of a culture.
Yeah, there's a company here in Indianapolis that does a graduation party every time an employee leaves the company, just to thank them about their contribution and to celebrate what they've brought to the company, but also to celebrate them as human beings and thank them, which is pretty cool. And even when you think of the onboarding process, it's crazy when you think about it, because when you start a new job, I mean, you should be excited about the new gig, right? About this new adventure. And then you start on your first job, and as you said, where to start. Like personally, for instance, my very first job out of school, I came in on the first day, and my boss was on vacation for 3 weeks.
Oh my gosh.
And my boss's boss had no idea what I was supposed to do. So luckily, I was in a team where other team members were very helpful, and they walked me through and things like that. But it's like, when you hire someone, that your boss is going to be away on vacation. So why would you start right away if you know that your direct supervisor is not going to be there for you? So it's
they should have given you 3 weeks vacation on day one. That would have been an amazing welcome to the company, right?
And that was in France, so 3 weeks of vacation is nothing.
Yes, that's true too. Yeah. Well, I do think that those are bellwether moments for organizations, and often not as much care is taken to really think through those milestones in a career. Good companies do it sometimes. Extraordinary companies do it every time, right? That's the difference.
Yeah. And that's the key between, again, being a sort of transactional type of organization where you may treat people well, but you see most of the relationships as transactional. And then you have other companies where you really put the people at the center of your experience, and you design everything around them. So it's, you shared earlier empathy and understanding, communications. So let's talk about Candor and feedback a little bit as well. Why do you think those two are very important?
I think in any great team, and actually in any great culture, there's what we call psychological safety. Mm-hmm. In other words, if you've got an idea, no matter how crazy it is, it's safe for you to share that idea, right? Candor in feedback. I know we've been doing it this way for 50 years. I think I found a better way. Rather than being shut down and say, well, you're new here, aren't you? Isn't that cute? We've been doing it, and we've been very successful for 50 years. I don't know if you've noticed. So those are the kind of ideas you should probably just keep to yourself, right? Being ridiculed, being put down. Well, you're never going to get another idea, let alone a good one from employees. When you create a culture and a team of psychological safety, that's where it's safe to speak up. It's safe to ideate, yes. Right? To explore. And what I love about cultures that have this psychological safety, and when we talk about it in The Best Team Wins, is challenging everything. You're safe to challenge everything. Is that you challenge ideas, not people. In toxic cultures, it's always personal. Mm-hmm. Well, who said that? Well, are you trying to be the smartest person? Oh, it's all about you again, isn't it? Those kinds of, even if it's not said, it's intended,
yes.
Right? The idea of saying, look, let's challenge ideas. Let's not challenge people. We love the company WD-40, Gary Ridge, one of our heroes, right? He says, we don't make mistakes at WD-40. We have learning opportunities.
Yeah.
Well, it's safe to make a mistake. He says, look, people come to work wanting to do a good job, right? He says, I might be naive in that thinking. I honestly believe that. And along the way, in trying to do a good job, they're going to make mistakes. So rather than make it punitive, let's step back and say, well, what did we learn? And how can we avoid making those mistakes in the future? Well, that's a very healthy, challenge everything culture. And in fact, when Gary took over WD-40, they were about a $280 million company. Now they're $2.8 billion. Do you think it worked? Yeah. And you ask him, what was the difference? And he said, really, it's our tribe. It's our culture. It's the opportunity where you're safe to really challenge everything and anything. And boy, the results are phenomenal.
That's awesome. I know of many companies actually that celebrate failure. And there's one, they do the Friday fuck-ups every Friday.
Oh my gosh.
What I fucked up this week and what I learned. It's pretty awesome, right?
Yeah, I might change the title a little bit. I do love that idea, though, that you would, celebrate. Well, Google has their dead day. The greatest ideas that didn't work, and they parade them all through the organization. Tata has the Dare to Try award, in their annual meetings, and they parade the worst ideas, and they're actually rewarded and celebrated.
Yeah,
which I love. Again, the message is: look, we're going to make mistakes. Don't hide them. Let's see, what did we learn? Because in a punitive culture, when you make a mistake, if you've been paraded in front of the executive and you throw yourself on your sword and so on, those are intimidating and punitive cultures that are going to suppress any kind of creativity that you might have.
The key is to get everyone involved in that idea of candor and failure and feedback and openness, from the CEO down to the newest person in the organization, right? It's not just team managers or team members. It has to start from the top too. Absolutely. The study of leadership that we've done, what I love about great leaders, and they understand in a deep way, is that the way they act gives everyone else on the team permission to act the same way. So if you are punitive, if you are demanding perfection in everything every time, that's the message for everyone else on the team. If you want to learn from mistakes, if you want to grow and develop, if you have created a safe place, it creates a safe place for everyone else on the team. So this idea of the leader sets the tone, it cascades from the leader, is absolutely true. And you've seen it so many times, I'm sure, in your work. Change a leader, change the culture, right? A new leader comes in, and he or she is going to bring her people with her, or her philosophy of doing work. And those transitions, again, can be difficult. And in those transitional times, that's where communication just has to really accelerate. You've got to make sure that everyone knows what is the goal, how are we going to get there, what are our expectations, making sure it's very clear throughout the organization, throughout the different mediums we have, personalizing the message and getting everyone to buy in. So, yeah, no question. To me, the only two differentiators left in competitive business today is leaders. You can never have too many of them, and culture, because it's hard to replicate. It is hard to replicate. That, for me, that's the main differentiator. Most of the products are commoditized, and what makes a difference is the culture. Let's talk a bit about organizations being focused on the experience as a whole and on the human. Over the past decades, there's been a focus on the customer experience, and over the past few years now, people are focusing more and more on employee-centric or focused organizations. So from your work and the research that you've done, how can leaders create an employee-focused organization?
Well, you tell them. I know that sounds very simplistic. Many companies have in their mission, vision, their values, and so on, our employees are our most valued asset. Do they know that? Mm-hmm. Right? And the idea that the customer experience will never exceed the employee experience is absolutely true. A perfect example of that is Avis Budget Rental Car. We found an amazing manager down in Dallas, Texas, Carlos Aguilera, where he started a practice as the team leader. He would put 10 coins in his left pocket every day, and he would set a goal to have 10 positive interactions with his people every day. The way we keep track is move a coin from his left pocket to his right pocket. Now, he's got to be out with his people. He's got to be texting them, calling them, dropping them notes, having team huddles and so on. He wanted to be a manager that was quick to recognize and slow to criticize. So often as leaders, we want to be problem solvers. So all we're looking for are problems. Well, whenever you show up, people go, well, he's here to tell me everything I've done wrong. From the moment I woke up to the minute I go to bed. Those aren't healthy cultures. Well, Avis grabbed that idea and actually did a North American tour and put up banners. You are appreciated, you the employee. So before people showed up with their cars or the website got open or the phones were live, they felt really good about who they are, what they're doing, the service they want to render. And that positivity absolutely flows to the customer. If before the doors open, you've got a manager that just reams everyone, you better make this day better be better than yesterday, because you're screwing up too much and I'm paying the price, and get out there and make our customers happy. Yeah, it doesn't work. Managing by fear, that doesn't create a good employee experience, and it translates into a horrible customer experience. So there's a perfect example of a trigger that a team manager used, 10 coins in his left pocket, to make sure that the employees knew that they came first and that the customer experience would never exceed the employee experience. It's my favorite case study of all time.
And the key is to get employees involved in designing that experience, right? It's not just the HR team or the executive team that is going to decide, okay, hey, this is what we're going to do in terms of our employee experience. You need to get your employees involved because you're going to get feedback from them, like you would get feedback from customers on your product or your service. And so that's how you're going to improve your product developments or your service delivery. But many organizations look at designing, whether it's the culture, the employee experience, or however they call it, they see it from their own perspective, from the C-suite, not from the employee's perspective.
Well, I think in great organizations, that's not true, actually. And we're talking about the great organizations. Uh-huh. HR has, I think, an extremely important role to play as a partner. And I think the key word is partner.
Yes.
How are we partnering? And to your point, have I gathered the information? Have I talked to the supervisors? Am I empowering them? Am I giving them the tools so that when they want to personalize an experience, they don't have to fill out 30 forms to give an extra day off, or to perhaps give a gift card, or, what are the tax ramifications and so on. They've set up the systems and they've empowered the leaders and the supervisors that when those occasions occur, throwing a quick after work party with maybe a barbecue and a cake, or taking people down to the bar, or going bowling, isn't an excruciating experience where they may or may not get reimbursed in the next 120 days. So I see what you're saying. In the cases where they don't understand those kinds of things, the C-suite can be an inhibitor, as you said, seeing it from their view. When you've got a robust partnership with HR and they've taken the time to understand what the supervisors need, what the workforce really wants, it can be very healthy, and in some cases even kind of magical.
So for those listening to us who inspire to be great leaders, what would be your number one advice?
Buy every book I've ever written.
That's an excellent one.
Yeah. We really do have a lot of great research. I would say become a student of leadership. And in becoming a student of leadership, make sure you surround yourself with good leaders.
Yep.
create a cadre of people. I joined the Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches Paid Forward. It's paid ridiculous dividends in being able to just talk to people that I've grown to really love and respect. Educate yourself, read. And I know that we don't read as much as we used to. We have a book, The Best Team Wins. Lancioni's got the 5 dysfunctions of a team, good to great. I mean, read the classics, immerse yourself in those great ideas. Create a LinkedIn community, follow leaders that you know and respect, read their writing, watch what they're doing and what they're saying, video clips, TED Talks, and so on. When you're a student of leadership and you keep feeding your brain, and you associate with other great leaders, you can't help but become a better leader yourself. So, in summation, surround yourself with great leaders, study great leaders, read, create a community. I think LinkedIn is a wonderful community of great thinkers. And TED Talks. There's a lot of great TED Talks out there that are 10 minutes long. Take 30 minutes a day and feed your brain. And as you become a better leader and you become better educated, you can't help but create better cultures and more effective teams. Did I get it right, do you think, Stefan?
Yes, you did. Before we conclude our conversation today, let me ask you some fun questions. So you were born and you grew up in Canada. Which part of Canada?
I was actually born in Edmonton, which is the capital of the province of Alberta. And then we moved when I was about 10 years old, and I grew up in Vancouver, British Columbia, right on the West Coast.
Okay. All right. And what do you miss the most about Canada, if anything?
Oh, I miss Canada deeply every day. I still have 3 of my brothers live up there. They've got wonderful chocolate in Canada. I think Canadian chocolate, I miss that. Smarties and crunchy bars. I just miss my family more than anything. I love the pace in Canada. It's a smaller population, although a larger country than living in the States. There's just a nice way of being up in Canada. It's very civil and very safe and a little slower pace. Having said that, I've taken out American citizenship, and I sing the national anthem with gusto down here as well. Growing up in Canada, our cousins were always the Americans, and I think there's a wonderful love between the two cultures. They are very different, as they should be, and at the same time very complementary. So I love growing up in Canada, and I love living in the States.
We have a similar path in terms of how we came here in the U.S. I met my wife as well, who's an American citizen, and have been in the U.S. for 15 years now, 17 years now. What is the thing that still irritates you after all this time in the U.S.?
I don't know that I'm one that dwells on the irritants. I guess one thing that can be a little exhausting is the election process. In Canada, it's like 6 weeks long. It seems like dates, it sort of never ends. That gets a little tiresome. But I love the home of the free and the land of the brave. I love that. People are proud to be Americans, that people still are desperately trying to get here to make a better life. I had a wonderful Uber driver the other day that has been here in the States for about 10 years, and he emigrated from Beirut. And I said, well, why did you come? And he said, for my children, so that my children would be safe and could get an education. He said, here in the U.S., people's lives matter. He said it got to the point where I lived where people were very disposable, and it was quite frightening. And I thought, what a wonderful story of a father. He says, my goal as a father is to keep my family safe, and to do that, I did everything I could to bring my family to the States. A lovely story. I mean, who isn't inspired by that? I
know, it's a lovely story, and I hear that a lot too. If you were to invite a historical figure to dinner, who would you pick and why?
Oh, great question. Growing up in Canada, you have that English connection, and your first reaction is, Winston Churchill. I would love to sit down with Winston Churchill. I tell you, I love history. I would love to sit down with. This might sound a little bizarre. I'd love to sit down with Genghis Khan. I think that what he did and with the Mongol hordes and bringing in all these artisans and artists and the Silk Road was beyond fascinating. And it might be dangerous to meet with Genghis Khan, friendly, bloodthirsty. I do think that would be a fascinating conversation.
We talked about failure a little bit earlier. What was your biggest screw up at work, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, that's an easy one. Adrian and I were promoting a new book that we had written while we were at OC Tanner, and it was really more my fault than anyone's. I thought I had gotten approval from the CEO to use the company database just to send out a free chapter. It wasn't soliciting anything. It was sort of, let's invite you in to some of our research. We think this would be helpful for you. We didn't scrub the data file as carefully as we should have, and we upset one of our biggest customers. It was one of those occasions where we were then required to stand up in front of the executive and apologize. What I learned from that was to be much more communicative, to have many more checkpoints to avoid that. And I really did understand that in the culture at the time, there was zero tolerance for failure. And in many ways, it actually ended our careers there. So yeah, that was a really big screw up. It all worked out okay in the end. We left the company and we've had wonderful careers. It was really eye-opening and head-snapping. Yeah, the way that all played out, and many sleepless nights and anxious moments. So thanks for bringing that back to my mind.
Well, enjoy your day. What sound or noise do you love?
Oh, the sound of my wife's voice and the sound of my grandchildren's voices. I think, family more than anything is just a delight. And, when I'm traveling, my wife and I will end every day by asking each other, what are the three things that you're thankful for today? What are the three things you're grateful for? And I just love hearing her voice.
What sound or noise do you hate?
The announcement at New Jersey Transit that my train into the city has been canceled.
What is the essential item that you always take with you when you go on vacation?
On vacation?
Yes.
Well, two things, actually. I always take my journal so that I can record what's going on. I have about over 40 plus journals that I've written in over the years, and my scriptures. I make sure I take my journal and my scriptures. Okay.
Journals, paper?
Yes, I'm really old school. I've tried to keep digital journals, and I know it makes a lot more sense. And if there's a fire, they're in the cloud. I'm just very old school. I love the tactile experience. I'll put tickets that to a hockey game, or photos of friends, or a thank you card that I've gotten from someone. They're some of my greatest treasures.
And I like, we had a discussion the other day with my kids as well, in terms of digital books or paper books, and even just the smell of very old books that you pick up at the library.
Isn't it great?
You cannot match that.
Yeah, it's the whole experience, and I know they're heavier. And sometimes when I pull my backpack out, I go, man, this is like I'm in the military. This is like a 60-pound pack that I run all around. And yet, when I unpack it all, I'm grateful that I've brought all of those things with me.
What is your favorite word?
My favorite word is probably, well, I have a few. I think lovely is one of my favorite words. I love it. Isn't that lovely?
It is.
Charming. I like charming and wonderful.
All right.
I've got a lot of favorite words, actually.
Your least favorite word?
Where are my glasses?
That's a funny one. What is the way for our listeners to follow you, The Culture Works on social media, and where to find your books and your upcoming book as well?
Yes, I mean, we're very active on LinkedIn. I'd encourage you to follow us there. Our books are available all over Amazon. Thank you for letting me plug our next book. We're very proud of this work. It's called Leading with Gratitude. I think it's probably our finest work, and if you are a student of leadership, I highly recommend it. Lots of great tools and ideas on how you can create a very positive, engaging workplace. And at the end of the book, we actually say, and don't forget to take it home and use those principles to apply with the teams that matter the most in your life, your family, your friends, your coaches, your ministers, and so on. So we have thecultureworks.com is our training company, and we've got many wonderful articles and whatnot in there. We do have training that goes with most of our books that you can do live or online. Our goal is to really make a difference and to create all-in cultures. So if you need any tools or ideas, thecultureworks.com, LinkedIn, chesterelton.com, amazon.com. And by the way, if you're going to buy a copy of our book, Leading with Gratitude, anybody can buy just one book. Buy 5, 6, 7. They make great gifts for anniversaries, birthdays, bar mitzvahs. Don't limit yourself to just buying one book.
And we'll share all of this on our podcast notes too. Any last word of advice or wisdom?
Just what I was saying. I love studying cultures. I love studying leaders for the very reason that my favorite data point of all time is when people are happy and engaged at work, they're happy and engaged in their personal lives. The importance of sending people home happy so that they can share that excitement and enthusiasm. We've all had jobs where it was misery, right? And we hated to get up in the morning to go to work. And when we came back from work, we were exhausted and beat up, and we shared all that misery with our families. The ripple effect of toxic cultures, of toxic bosses, is so destructive. So when you learn these best practices and you create these great cultures, be sure not to leave it at work. Be sure to take that home. Be present with your family. Turn off your phone. Enjoy those people that you cherish the most. To me, if our work did only that, I would consider ourselves incredibly successful.
That's a great way to end our conversation today. Thank you so much, Chester, for being with us on the show.
Well, it's been a delight, Stefan. You asked great questions. You've clearly done this before.
You too, I would guess. It was not your first time.
Well, and you know what? Feel free to call anytime. This was a delight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the EX Podcast. If you want to learn more, visit our website at expodcast.com. If you want to find out more about our next conferences, go to exsummit.com. Finally, you can also find my manifesto on business to employee or B2E branding at b2ebranding.co. See you next week.